And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Justice Department's begun reviewing a controversial unit inside the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration that uses secret domestic surveillance tactics, including intelligence gathered by the National Security Agency, to target Americans for drug offenses. According to a series of articles published by the Reuters news agency, agents are instructed to recreate the investigative trail in order to conceal the origins of the evidence, not only from defense lawyers, but also sometimes from prosecutors and judges. DEA training documents instruct agents to even make up alternative versions of how such investigations truly begin, a process known as parallel construction. On Monday, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney was asked about the Reuters investigation.
It's my understanding, our understanding, that the Department of Justice is looking at some of the issues raised in the story. But for more, I would refer you to the Department of Justice. The
unit of the DEA that distributes the secret intelligence to agents is called the Special Operations Division, or SOD. 24 partner agencies comprise the unit, including the FBI, CIA, NSA, Internal Revenue Service, and the Department of Homeland Security. The unit was first created 2 decades ago, but it's coming under increased scrutiny following the recent revelations about the NSA maintaining a database of all phone calls made in the United States. One former federal judge, Nancy Gertner, said the DEA program sounds more troubling than recent disclosures that the NSA has been collecting domestic phone records. She said, quote, "It is one thing to create special rules for national security. Ordinary crime is entirely different. It sounds like they're phoning up investigations." For more, we're joined by the reporter who broke the story, John Schiffman, correspondent for Reuters, which published his exclusive story Monday, U.S. tells agents to cover up use of wiretap program. Welcome to Democracy Now!, John. Why don't you start off by just laying it out and what exactly this cover-up is?
Thanks very much for having me. Well, my colleague Christina Cook and I spoke with about a dozen or 2 dozen agents and obtained some internal documents that showed that what federal agents, not just DEA agents, but other agents who work with the DEA and do drug investigations, what they're doing is they are starting. They're claiming that their investigation starts, say, at step 2. They are withholding step 1 from the investigations. And I should say it's not just NSA intercepts. It's informant information obtained from court-ordered wiretaps in one case and using those for information in a second case. They also have a large database of phone records. Whenever the DEA subpoenas or does a search warrant and gets phone records for someone suspected of involvement in drugs or gang involvement, they put all those numbers into one giant database they call DICE, and they use that information to compare different cases. All of the collection seems perfectly legitimate in terms of being court-ordered. What troubles some critics is the fact that they are hiding that information from drug defendants who face trial. And the problem with that is that these defendants won't know about some potentially exculpatory information that may affect their case and their right to a fair trial.
So explain exactly how this information is being hidden from judges, prosecutors, and sometimes defense attorneys as well.
Sure. Well, just to give an example, through any of these 4 different ways, including the NSA intercepts, the DEA's Special Operations Division will send the information to a DEA agent in the field or a FBI agent or an ICE agent or a state policeman, and they'll give them the information, and then they'll say, look, we understand that there'll be a truck going to a certain park in Texas at a certain time. It's a red truck, and there'll be 2 people involved. And the state trooper or the DEA will find a reason to pull the truck over, say for a broken taillight or for speeding, that sort of thing. And lo and behold, inside the trunk, they'll find, a kilo of cocaine. The people who've been arrested will never know that why the police or the DEA pulled them over. They'll think it's just luck. And that's important because if those people try to go to trial, there are pieces of information about how that evidence was obtained and what it shows and what other pieces of it show might affect their trial.
On Monday, I spoke with Guardian columnist Glenn Greenwald just after your story broke about how the DEA is using material gathered in part by the NSA in its surveillance of Americans. Glenn Greenwald has, of course, broken several major stories about the NSA's domestic activity. This was his response.
So this should be a huge scandal for the following reason. The essence of the Constitution is that the government cannot obtain evidence or information about you unless it has probable cause to believe that you've engaged in a crime, and then goes to a court and gets a warrant, and only then is that evidence usable in a prosecution against you. What this secret agency is doing, according to Reuters, it is circumventing that process by gathering all kinds of information without any court supervision, without any oversight at all, using surveillance technologies and other forms of domestic spying. And then when it gets this information that it believes it can be used in a criminal prosecution, it knows that that information can't be used in a criminal prosecution because it's been acquired outside of the legal and constitutional process. So they cover up how they really got it, and they pretend, they make it seem as though they really got it through legal or normal means by then going back and retracing the investigation once they already have it and reacquiring it so that it looks to defense counsel and even to judges and prosecutors like it really was done in the constitutionally permissible way. So they're prosecuting people and putting people in prison for using evidence that they've acquired illegally, which they're then covering up and lying about and deceiving courts into believing was actually required constitutionally. It's a full frontal assault on the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments and on the integrity of the judicial process, because they're deceiving everyone involved in criminal prosecutions about how this information has been obtained.
John Schiffman, if you could elaborate on that and also talk about the differences between what the DEA is doing and what Glenn Greenwald exposed around the NSA.
Sure. These are two very I think they're different topics for one main reason, which is that the NSA revelations by Mr. Greenwald and Mr. Snowden are related to terrorism, or at least that's what we're told, and by the government. And the DEA, what the DEA is doing is very rarely do they get involved in terrorism, and they do some narco-terrorism, but inside the United States, we're talking about ordinary crime. We're talking about drug dealing, organized crime, money laundering. We're not talking about national security crimes. The one thing I would say is that the defense analysts I've spoken with, meaning defense attorney analysts, they emphasize less the probable cause aspect of it. They don't find that as troubling. What they find really troubling is the pretrial discovery aspects of this, and a prosecutor's obligation to turn over any exculpatory evidence. What they really have a problem with is that this program systematically excludes, or appears to systematically exclude, all evidence obtained that's hidden from view, so the defense doesn't know to request it. They find that a lot more troubling than the probable cause aspects of it. The Supreme Court has given a pretty wide pro-police interpretation of when probable cause can be obtained, and a variety of exceptions. But it's really the pretrial discovery part of it that seems to trouble a lot of the former judges and defense attorneys and prosecutors.
One of the two slides Reuters obtained that were used to train agents with the Drug Enforcement Agency instructs them in the use of parallel construction. According to the slide, this is, quote, the use of normal investigative techniques to recreate the information provided by the Special Operations Division, such as subpoenaed domestic telephone calls. A second slide instructs agents that such evidence, quote, cannot be revealed or discussed. The slide is titled Special Operations Division Rules. Describe what you uncovered about those rules and this concept of parallel construction, which until now had not been publicly discussed in writing.
Well, what really surprised me was talking to agents, current and former agents, who said, sure, we do that. Half of them said, yeah, I could see how people might have a problem with that. The other half said, look, this is a hard job that we do, and we're going after criminals and drug dealers. The people that got the most offended, I think, were the lawyers, the prosecutors, and the judges and the former judges. One current prosecutor told me that he had a case where in Florida, where a DEA agent came to him with a case and said that it began with an informant, so they were proceeding with the case. And the prosecutor asked the DEA agent more information. He said, I need to know more about your informant. Turns out, ultimately, that they found out that there was no informant. It was an NSA wiretap, and overseas. And that really upset the prosecutor, because he said that it really offended his sense of fair play and honesty, and he said it's just a bad way to start an investigation if you're going to start with a lie.
I wanted to bring Ethan Nadelmann into this discussion, Executive Director of the Drug Policy Alliance. Ethan, why are the revelations by Reuters, John Schiffman's investigation, so significant for your work?
Well, I think what it plays into, Amy, is that there's been this remarkable lack of oversight of DEA by Congress, by other federal oversight agencies for decades now. I mean, this year marks the 40th anniversary of the DEA, which Nixon created as a merger of police agencies and drug enforcement agencies back during the one of the earlier drug wars. And what you see is an organization with a budget of over $2 billion. You see an organization getting involved in all sorts of shenanigans, hiring informants who land up to be tied up with murderers, locking up some poor drug, I don't even drug dealer, this low-level offender, and forgetting about him in a prison cell. This case of Daniel Chong, who was left in a prison cell for 5 days and forgotten. But beyond that, you have the agency serving as a propaganda agency with none of its statements being compared or held to any sort of scientific standards. You have an administrator who testifies before Congress and is almost a laughingstock when it comes to talking about drugs. So I think that this report by Reuters and by John Schiffman, I hope it's a sort of wake-up call for people in Congress to say now's the time finally, after really 40 years, to say this agency really needs a close examination.
Ethan, the Drug Enforcement Administration has agreed to pay $4.1 million in a settlement to a San Diego college student who nearly lost his life after being left handcuffed in a cell for more than 4 days without food or water. He ultimately drank his urine as he lay there, yelling out to agents right outside. His name was Daniel Chong. He was arrested for a 420 celebration of marijuana culture. He was never charged with any crime, and ultimately he was released.
Well, I think, that's the case I was mentioning before. Part of it, one could say, oh, this is just an accident, and accidents happen. But, of course, accidents like that should never happen when you're talking about a police agency, much less a federal police agency, being allowed to just sort of forget about somebody. And in the end, what happens? The taxpayers bail out the DEA for almost killing somebody for no cause whatsoever. So, each year the DEA goes through its own little, appropriations hearings in Congress. Each year it gets approved, and each year they just sort of get a ride. I think these things are piling up in a way that can no longer be sustained, should no longer be sustained.
So what has been, John Schiffman, the response to your investigation by the DEA, by the NSA, by the FBI, and others?
Well, they say it's perfectly legal what they do. And they say that one DEA official told us that, this is a bedrock principle, parallel construction. We use it every day. They were pretty unabashed about it and said that, that they've been doing this since the late 90s, and there's really nothing wrong with it. Yesterday, the Justice Department said they are going to review it. But DEA has said, there's no problem with this.
How many people does this impact?
Well, it would impact. I would think it would impact everyone, because we're talking about a principle of law here. Not to get too legal, but if you're arrested, one of the fundamental rights that you have is to see the evidence against you. When I was at the DEA and doing the interview, they cited the Ted Stevens case, which involved prosecutorial misconduct, in which the senator's charges were thrown out because evidence was concealed. They said that after that, there had been a review of all of the discovery procedures throughout the Justice Department, including at Special Operations Division. But they said that, and so I said, well, great, could I see a copy of the review? And they said no.
So, Ethan Nadelmann, it's all legal.
Well, you know, that's what happens when any agency gets to just do what it wants to do for years and years and years without anybody looking over its shoulder. I mean, Amy, this agency has also done things in the areas of medical marijuana, scientific research, the scheduling process of drugs, whereby they will go through an entirely legal process through their own administrative law process hearings. They will have an internal judge, an administrative law judge, come down with recommendations that are scientifically based, that are credible, and then they will have the politically appointed head of this agency overrule those recommendations for no purpose whatsoever. Once again, Congress is not asking any questions. It's their job to look at, I mean, obviously it's the Obama administration's job as well and Eric Holder's job as well, but it's ultimately Congress as well that has to care about these things. And I'm hoping that it's not just Democrats in the Senate, but also Republicans in the House will say this agency's gone too far. Republicans have never been great friends of overextensions of federal police power, and I hope they can find some common cause with Democrats saying, wait a second, let's call the DEA in here. Let's look at what John Schiffman has found with his investigative report. Let's look at all these other patterns of abuse and misbehavior.
We want to thank you both for being with us. John Schiffman for your reporting at Reuters, and Ethan Nadelmann, thanks so much for joining us. We'll link to the story at democracynow.org. Ethan Nadelmann, Executive Director of the Drug Policy Alliance.